Joining me now for our election debate panel, Democratic strategist and HED president Fred Hicks and former California Republican Party chairman Tom Del Beccaro. And Fred, I want to go to you first on this issue of the polls, because the question certainly is, all of these polls really are in that tight margin of error. Is the Harris campaign at this point, do you think, overconfident? They say that it's a tough fight, but they seem to be sometimes acting like they think that they've got this thing in the bag. What do you say?
Absolutely not. One of the things that the Harris campaign has really underscored and emphasized over the last week is that she is still the underdog. The polling is the polling. She has made up all the ground that Joe Biden lost in the early part of the year, and she's pulled into a tie or ahead in the national polls, and as you mentioned, several of the swing states. But the reality is that she right now is still a little bit behind where she and President Biden were 4 years ago. And so we know there's a lot to do. There's a lot ahead, including the very crucial debate next week.
Tom, I want to ask you about these polls on the other side of this, Tom, because do you think that the Republicans, and this has been bantered about in particular by Nate Silver and others, that the Republicans aren't being necessarily represented in many of these larger national polls that we're seeing where Harris is still ahead?
Well, I think overall, Kamala has reached her high water mark. And yes, we have a history of media polls that oversample Democrats. And then we have an entire history of Trump support not somehow coming through in a lot of polls, although there are certainly polls by, for instance, Trafalgar that has done a much better job at that than others. So the question is, where are we in crucial states like Pennsylvania? And to me, her lack of specifics is now beginning to hurt her. If you remember in Dole versus Clinton, Dole didn't come out with his policies until too late in the game and had already been defined, and that worked against him. Kamala's support is slipping away now because she's still undefined. She doesn't even have a policy page, and now people are skeptical of her. So I think she's at her high water mark. And yes, the Trump support in all likelihood is being underreported across the country.
Well, and to that point, the former president here in New York City yesterday laid out his economic agenda point by point, and it talks a lot about things that, frankly, investors and people that are on Wall Street want to hear. Less regulation, more energy production, lower taxes, a lower corporate tax rate. Those are things that do resonate with those that are focused on their money and their wallets, and that is a large swath of the nation because the economy certainly is polling at the top of the biggest issues. But I do want to get to the debate with both of you. So much to talk about. So the vice president is in Pennsylvania today. She's spending 5 days hunkering down, preparing for the ABC News presidential debate with former President Trump. That is next week. Now, Trump is sticking to the same prep he did before his debate against President Biden, engaging in policy discussions with his closest confidants. ABC News announced that the official debate rules, well, they did, no props or pre-written notes allowed. There's no live audience. Mics will be muted when it's not the candidate's time to speak. Now, the Harris campaign had been pushing for hot mics during the entire debate. The network reportedly offered, quote, assurances that if there is significant crosstalk between Harris and Trump, it may choose to turn on the mics so the public can understand what is happening. Fred, taking this first to you, because the Harris camp wanted those mics on.
Yeah. So, first I want to go to the previous point. I keep hearing people say that the Harris campaign has hit a high water mark with the polling, yet she continues to improve week after week and poll after poll. And so I think we just need to be honest about that and look at it and say that Americans right now are not happy. And we saw this earlier in the year with the polling. They're not really happy with Donald Trump, and they've been excited and energized by an alternate.
Well, Fred, I'll push back though and say that I'll push back though and say all of these polls are in the margin of error, but we have shown these polls, and she has gained ground in many of these swing states. Absolutely. And we did show the numbers, just to be fair. But go ahead.
Well, she is. And so, I don't believe she's hit a high water mark. Now, going into this debate, she is exactly where she wanted to be at this point, which is dead even or slightly ahead. And so the preparation that she's putting into this several days is reflective of just how important this is. Listen, the June 27th debate here in Atlanta was a Waterloo for President Biden. And so all these talks, all the discussions, discussion, all the angst around her policies and any other issues related to her can be addressed in this debate, and she's aware of that. If she knocks it out of the park on the 10th, then that will be, I think, the final shift, and we will see yet another surge in the polls. If she does not, then we could. Then the campaign could be in trouble. But I think that she understands that. I think that the team understands that, and that's why she's putting so much into this, because this is the defining moment for her.
A fair question for her is going to be policy specifics. And Tom, you do make a good point about the website. I do want to be clear. We got specifics from Trump. We want to hear more from the Harris campaign. Tom, I do want to bring this to your attention. Peggy Noonan, a famed presidential historian, has an op-ed in the Journal this morning. It's all about the debate. And here's what she says, Tom. She says, this debate will be as important as everybody says. In a close race, a good performance by one candidate could be dispositive. More dramatically, one might implode, as Joe Biden did. People are going to watch to see if this happens again.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, I debated her twice in 2016 for the U.S. Senate race, and she has a lack of depth of knowledge in economics and foreign policy. You know what she's doing right now? She's figuring out what she will say she's going to do as president of the United States, because she's going to be asked those questions. She hasn't determined that yet. And so as she prepares, it's going to be very hard for her, because unlike Trump, who had actual policies, she's got to suddenly say what they're going to be, memorize them, and be able to talk about it in an articulate manner. She's not particularly good at that. That's the knock on her. You know, I call her a one-punch debater. She'll have a few zingers, but she has no follow-up. So people are going to watch her to see if the word salads come out or not, almost as much as they want to try and figure out what her policies will be. And so the pressure's on her, because the knock on her is she's not ready for this. And I think that showed in the CNN interview.
Yeah, Fred, I want you to respond to that, because she knows what her critics are saying about her, and the campaign knows what the critics are saying.
Absolutely. So the one point on which Tom and I agree is that the burden is on Kamala Harris in the debate. Listen, America knows what Donald Trump is and is not, and they've already made up their minds. The decisions have been made with respect to whether or not they like his policies. Now, they've also made up their minds about whether or not they like him. And so for her, for the vice president, this is the opportunity to win the election on September 10th. Even though the votes will not be cast or a final tally until November 5th, this is that moment for her. And I believe that because she has done a great job along the way in terms of handling herself as DA, handling herself as Attorney General, handling herself as a U.S. Senator, handling herself as a Vice President, that she will be prepared and she will articulate a vision of going and looking forward, not going back to 2016 or 2020 when Donald Trump nearly wrecked the economy. And I think that she's going to articulate a very positive vision for the future, right. And this is her opportunity.
Okay, Tom, real quick before you go, which Donald Trump is going to show up, in your opinion, next week? Is it going to be the Donald Trump that debated Joe Biden this year, or is it going to be the Donald Trump that debated Joe Biden 4 years ago?
I think the fact that he's been answering questions for 35 straight days means he's going to be more like the person who debated Joe Biden. Remember, it's difficult this is not man against man. He has to be more respectful, and I think you'll see that.
Interesting. All right. Well, gentlemen, it's always great to see both of you. Appreciate your time. And here we go. Next week, probably the only, at this point, we think the only debate we're going to get between these two. Fred Hicks, Tom Del Beccaro. Gentlemen, thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, too.
All right. We have a lot more coming up this morning. Sky high fees.